Hello everybody, and this video is another one of my personal games. This game was played last night in the London League for the team Drunken Knights. And for this game, I turned up about 20 minutes late, so not a great start. And unfortunately, my opponent had decided to play with an adjournment, which, for those of you who don't know, in my opinion, it's the very stupid rule, which states that the time control will be 36 moves made in 90 minutes each, and then once you've completed 36 moves, one of you can pause the game, write down a move, seal it in an envelope, and then the game is abandoned, and at some future point, you and your opponent meet up again and resume the game from where it left off. So, in my opinion, that may have been good 20, 30 years ago, but today, with computers, you could just analyze the position at home, and it's just a question of who's analyzed the position better. So, I prefer finishing a game on the night. So, I was very annoyed that my opponent had chosen to play this time control. So I tried my best to finish the game before we'd made 36 moves. That way there'd be no chance of the game being abandoned. So I was white and I was playing against David Rowson, who is rated 192 ECF, which is slightly below my own rating of 197, but the two are practically identical ratings. It's approximately 2100 or 2200 FIDE. I played c4, e5, knight c3, d6. So d6 isn't that common a move, but it does allow for a very flexible setup from black. There's the possibility of black playing a Botvinnik with c5 and knight c6, knight ge7, and fianchettoing. There's the King's Indian Defence, which has the moves d6 and e5 in it. And there's also what he played, which is after g3, he played a Dutch with f5. I'm not too scared of the Dutch, so it's not that disconcerting. I played bishop g2, and now knight f6, which is perfectly logical. So here there's a few options black has. One, which is just to not really develop anything on the queen side and to just go all out for a kingside attack with moves like g6, bishop g7, castles, and trying to get in the move f4 as early as possible. And there's also a more restrained version with moves like c6, bishop e6, knight bd7, just completing development. So I didn't quite know what kind of game I was in for here. I played b4 because that's not very often played and it does look a bit crazy. So my idea there is to counter his kingside attack with a thematic English queenside advance, queenside initiative. And here I was expecting to move bishop e6, no, not bishop e6, sorry, c6, and then bishop e6, targeting the weak c4 pawn. But after I'd made the move b4, I then realised he had an even stronger move, a5. And this does leave me in a bit of a difficult situation. If I take the pawns, then he'll have the semi-open A file, and I'll have a weak isolated pawn on A2. So I don't want to do that. A3 is impossible because after he would take on B4, I cannot recapture because my rook on A1 would be taken. So I made the only move left to me, which is B5. And this is quite a common move in the English, playing b4, b5. What it does quite well is it restricts black from playing c6, as well as moving the knight to a6 or c6. And it gains more space on the queen side. On the downside, though, it does weaken all the dark squares on the queen side for me. So the c5 square is a very good looking square for black to put a knight onto. Knight bd7. So again, knight c5 is the idea. And here I decided to try and contest the dark squares as well. I played e3, which the move e3 on its own is not that rare in the English. It's just trying to play either f4 or d4. In this case, d4. But in this position, against this kind of Dutch, while it does restrict black from playing f4, black can play e4 here, and then if I play d4, he can take en passant, and then my dark squares are weakened forever. So I think he missed that move and played bishop e7. He just missed e4. Just on a side note, if I play f3, he doesn't need to be worried too much because he could just take. And then after I recapture, if I play d4, my e3 pawn is backward and very, very vulnerable. So that idea isn't very feasible. But first I play a4 to try and prevent black pushing a4 himself. It's a bit of a nonsense-looking move, but it does have some idea behind it. One is just to guard b5, and this will later on allow me to play c5 if I can manage it, and then my b5 pawn is no longer underprotected. Also, I was planning on playing queen b3 in a moment, and if knight c5 is not played, if knight b6 is played instead, I would be able to play queen b3, and he wouldn't be able to kick the queen with a4. I also sort of rationalized this move because I thought the bishop a3 would be a good move later on, and I don't want it to be blocking the pawn on a2. Finally, I thought that as he hadn't played e4 last turn, he probably wouldn't play it this turn, and he would probably just play a move like castles. And I was right. So psychology can play a very big part in chess, because you sort of have to try and get inside the head of your opponent. And I was right about this. I wasn't right about the whole game, but I was right about this particular part of the opening. So quickly I played d4, and here he actually took, which surprised me. I thought he was going to keep tension in the centre. So that's good. I think this is good for me now, because even though my king is not castled and I can't castle, his move rook e8, or queen e8, which can be played, will fall flat because I have knight g to e2, which develops the knight. It's better than knight f3 here, because knight f3 would block the line of my bishop, and I can't bring the knight to f4, which could be played in some lines. But he plays knight b6 now, and here I was very pleased with myself because I thought I'd found a really strong move. Knight g to e2. The computer, of course, being the monster that it is, proves me wrong, because I reasoned that knight takes c4 was not playable because of queen b3, aiming at the black king, pinning the knight. If bishop e6, I have d5, which will win a piece, but d5, protecting the knight, I thought I'd won, not won, I thought I was better because I have knight takes pawn, and after knight takes knight, queen takes knight, it's equal on material, and I still have this very annoying pin on his knight. of course, the computer found the move bishop b4 check, king f1 is the best move. And now after bishop e6, queen d3, rook e8, maybe bishop f4. Black is better here because my king is annoying the rest of my pieces. My rooks aren't connected. My knight on e2 may have to stay there because there's no other good square. And his minor pieces are very active. So this wasn't played in the game, very fortunately, but it does show I hadn't calculated far enough. Part of it was that I was still very annoyed about the adjournment, and also as I'd arrived 20 minutes late, I was trying to make up time and play moves quickly. So instead he played the inferior move, king h8, instead of knight takes c4. And the reason for this is just to get out of any pins that I have on after knight takes c4, queen b3. So now his knight won't be pinned and he'll just be a pawn up. So I don't play queen b3, I play queen d3 to protect the pawns and centralize the queen. But again, the computer finds this crazy looking move which does work out. I could have played knight f4, temporarily sacking the pawn, and then after castles knight back to b6, rook e1, it's very hard for black to maneuver the pieces. If the bishop on c8 moves, I can take on b7. His bishop on e7 can't move at all, and his knights can't really move to any better squares. So rook e8 is probably best. Queen b3, bishop f8, bishop d2, and then black has nothing better than to just give up the pawn on d5 to get an exchange of pieces. And then here it's still better for white, but black does have counter chances, having the two bishops. So even though this has given us about half a pawn better for white, it isn't really my kind of position. I would prefer to have black here, to be honest, because white has the isolated pawn. I don't feel like white has a knockout punch here. I think that black is actually okay after maybe playing c6. So again, it's my personal preference. The computer says, and an objective analysis says, that white is better, but it just isn't my style of play. So instead of knight f4, I play queen d3, queen e8. Now, queen e8 is often seen in the Dutch. The idea is to bring the queen around to the king side, to h5 or g6, and that will aid in the attack against the usually castled by now white king. Also, there's a potential threat against my king. I can't see anything concrete, but it's annoying, so I castle to complete development. And now queen f7. So the c4 pawn has become a target for him. And this is one of the downsides to pushing your pawns very, very early, is that they can later become fixed and then be attacked. So at this point, I didn't want to give up the pawn with knight f4, although again the computer does recommend that move. Instead, I play the more simple move d5. So I'm gaining space on the queen side again, and I'm making that light squared bishop of his look rather stupid. But again, there's the rather big downside in that all my dark squares now are just permanently weakened. So I need to calculate how to nullify his knights coming to those dark squares. The strongest move, again, the computer talking, says knight on f6 to d7 is strongest. But he played knight g4, which targets both the e3 and the e5 squares. So his idea, if I don't make another move, or I make a rather silly one like king h1, his idea is knight to e5, and then he'll have two knights attacking c4. So he's threatening to win a pawn. I play f4, and now knight d7. So e5 has been taken away. I thought b6 wasn't actually that bad for the knight. I thought it was okay. But he's trying to improve his knight by putting it onto c5. I can't prevent the knight coming to c5, but what I can do is swap it off. So I play bishop a3, knight c5, and takes. So here you may be wondering, why have I given up the two bishops, which I'm always harping on about and which I think is so great? Well, the reason is that I thought that his knight on c5 was going to exert so much pressure on my position, and it was going to be such a good piece anchored on c5, that his knight is going to be the best minor piece on the board. And my bishop on c1, that went to a3, is going to have a very hard time finding a good place to go. So I decided that my bishop was going to be so much worse than his knight that I may as well swap it off. Also, with his knight on c5, it's also quite difficult to find a good square for my knights, because if I move them around too much, then he could develop the rest of his pieces and gain a rather annoying attack, maybe along the e-file. So I just nipped that problem in the bud, and here I still have a space advantage on the queen side. So first I just play rook a d1, and there's a very good threat here of playing b6 next move. Then if he took, I have the move d6, and I'm going to try and push the pawn all the way up the board. So he plays bishop d6 to prevent me pushing the pawn. And he's using his bishop as a blockader, which is good. His bishop on c8 still isn't very active at all. Part of the reason for that is that he hasn't been allowed to play f4. So when he plays f4 in the Dutch, often the bishop on c8 can jump all the way to g4 in one move. But here the bishop is trapped behind the f5 pawn. So at this point, I could have played the more solid move, rook fe1 here, and tried to contest the e-file, which is one of the only features of the position where either side can make any progress. But instead, I saw the very interesting move, b6. Now, this known as a clearance sacrifice. Generally, its centre pawn is pushed to do a clearance sacrifice, but sometimes it can be a wing pawn. The reason this is such a good move is that it gives the b5 square for my knight. If black takes the pawn, he didn't, he played rook e8, but if he takes the pawn, I have knight to b5 attacking the bishop, and if the bishop moves away, I can then push my pawn to d6. And if he defends his bishop, I can take it and then put my knight on e2 to c3 and then to b5, again targeting d6. So there, my knights may be extremely useful, and his bishops are going to be very bad because the position is so blocked in. He doesn't take the pawn though. He plays rook e8, and now there's a threat here. Can you see what black is threatening to do? Well, there's two threats. The first one, which isn't a big deal, is playing queen e7 and doubling on the e-file. That's not such a big problem. The main problem is knight to e3, which would fork the bishop and the two rooks, so black could win the exchange. Now my answer to that is I do not care. I play knight b5. I could have played rook f3, but then all my pieces are becoming cramped and the coordination is terrible. And I'm not really using the advantage that b6 has given me. What's the point of playing b6 if I can't play knight b5? So, knight e3. And here I take on c7. So I have the threat of knight takes bishop, which would fork the queen and rook. So, according to the computer, it worked out this incredible line where black is not completely lost, but is worse. Bishop takes c7, d6, bishop b6, and here I'd analysed this line over in the game, and I thought that d7 just won for white. But actually, there's bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, and I'd had this position in my head, and I hadn't seen the next move. I thought that if knight takes rook, I can then take the knight with my king, and I will have two knights for the rook, and all my pieces should be a lot better than his pieces. Instead, though, he has knight takes bishop, king takes, and then he wins his piece back with rook takes knight. Rook f2, takes, rook b8. And here I am a pawn down, but my knight is much better than his bishop, and my rook is much better than his rook. So this position is given as being about plus 1.5 for white after a move like knight d6. I can win the pawn on b7 at my leisure, and I also am attacking f5 as well. So later on, perhaps I could push my kingside pawns and create a passed pawn by bringing my king all the way around to g5, let's say. So here, this is an okay position for me. I would like this as white. But again, I hadn't seen that far ahead, but it's still very good for me. So after b takes c7, he doesn't take on c7 with the bishop. Instead, he guards the bishop with his rook a6. And here I'm definitely going to go the exchange down. But again, I don't really care too much. I want to improve my minor pieces. So my knight on b5 is perfect. I don't need to take the bishop yet. I can save that move for when it's going to be most effective. My bishop on g2 is doing as much as can be expected. But my knight on e2 is not very good, which is generally seen in the Botvinnik English or other English type systems where the knight goes to e2. You normally have to move it somewhere else. So I move it to c3, and that's a reserve knight in a way. After I take on d6 later, I can just put the other knight onto b5. Knight takes f1, and now I make a slight error, and I don't play the best move on the board. Now is actually the time to play knight takes d6, rook takes, knight b5, rook h6, and queen takes knight. So at this point here, I felt that I'd briefly looked at this line, but I thought that queen h5 was good for black here, but it turns out that's not true. Bishop d7, d6, queen h5. I have the move h3, and the trouble is that if he plays a move like rook e2, I would have I'd have bishop f3, skewering, forking the rook and queen. So rook he6, bishop f3, queen g6, king g2. And okay, black has stopped the pawns advancing anymore, but those two pawns are easily worth the exchange. I'm also planning later to play bishop takes b7, and then I'd be threatening c8 queen. So actually here, the more pieces I can swap off, the better my position becomes. So I really, really like this continuation from white. Unfortunately, I didn't play it. I played king takes f1. I thought that the queen, rook, and bishop were all doing a great job where they were, so why move them? My king wasn't doing anything. I may as well use my king to do something. Now, here, the reason that king takes f1 isn't so good is black has the move bishop takes, knight takes, queen takes, d6, queen f7, d7, takes, queen takes c4. Again, I hadn't seen as far as this. I hadn't seen queen takes c4. So king g1, rook a8, queen d3, and the computer gives this as roughly even from this position here. Black has a pawn and a rook for a bishop and knight. And I personally favour the bishop and knight, but I can see this is going to be very hard for either side to win. So it's probably drawn. So bishop takes c7 there is the best move. It just eliminates that powerful c7 pawn. When pawns get to the 6th rank or the 7th rank, they become almost as good as a piece. So I would have taken, probably anyway. He didn't play that. He played bishop d7 to try and eliminate the knight on b5. And here I felt I didn't quite have enough momentum to win by taking on d6. So what I try and do is swap pieces. Again, I think as long as I can keep that pawn on c7, the more pieces come off, the better I become, because eventually he's not going to have enough to prevent the c7 pawn queening. So I play rook d2 as a quiet, sneaky waiting move. He plays h6, preparing the move g5 to try and finally start attacking, as is normal in the Dutch. But the reason I played d2, rook d2, is to play rook e2. And now, if he captures my rook, instead of taking with the king, as I would have to when it was on e1, I can now recapture with the queen, seizing the open file. And that's exactly what he does. I was actually planning to take his rook on e8 if he didn't take my one. So queen takes, and here g5 is a bit weakening, so he plays g6. But I think from this point, any move is lost for black, because now I have my move. Knight takes d6, rook takes, and knight b5. Notice that if bishop takes b5, I can play c8 equals queen. And then I'll be a queen up and it's game over. So rook a6 to stop me taking the rook. And the idea there is to reroute the rook to the 8th rank by playing rook a8 and then stopping me playing c8 queen. I play d6, rook a8, and here I just want to restrict any counterplay. So I play queen e5 check, king h7, bishop d5. So I'm forcing the queen back, f8. And the best move, again, according to the computer, is bishop takes b7, which is the more obvious move. But I was slightly concerned at the time about rook e8. So I play bishop e6. I'm trying to eliminate his bishop so that he doesn't have a blockader anymore. And it's one fewer piece guarding the c8 square. Now here, I think his last chance to try and cause me problems is to play rook e8, bishop takes, rook takes, pawn takes, queen f7. So black is now threatening queen takes c4, check, and then there'll be perpetual check leading to a draw. So the move I found was e6, queen f6, queen, check, king f2, very important to play king f2, queen b2 check, king f3, queen b1, so the idea is to play queen e4 check, and then it's a perpetual. if he tried checking me on b3, I can put my king onto f4, then e5, then f6, and run all the way up the board. So bishop c6, takes, queen d7 check, queen f6 check, sorry, queen f7 check, queen f6 check. And now I have knight c3, and this guards against all the perpetual check opportunities. So this would be one for white, but I had to calculate this very precisely. So going back to the game, he actually just took my bishop. Queen takes, rook e8. And here I do slightly muck it up a bit. I don't play the most accurate move, which would just win on the spot. Because I was getting a bit nervous here, as we were almost at the 36 move mark. And then he would have the opportunity to walk away, and I would have to resume the game some other time, which I hate doing. I want the game finished now. So I don't play the most accurate move. The best move that wins on the spot is queen d7 check, king g8, and here I'd looked at this and I couldn't quite see a way to force my queen, to queen my pawn. But there's a very obvious move which is easy to see when you're not under pressure, is knight a7. Knight a7. Simple move, and there's no perpetual check opportunities. He's paralyzed. He can't move his queen or rook anywhere. So king h8 is probably an okay move, and then queen c8, takes, 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 and he can't stop me queening the other pawn that I have, as well as being a piece up. So I missed the more elegant way of winning. I actually played the move d7. And we get the rather comical situation here of after rook takes queen, I'm down 10 points in material at this exact moment, and I still am completely winning after queen d8, or pawn d8 equals queen. Queen g7, and that's his last roll of the dice. If I play c8 queen, whoops, I think he actually wins this position, which is very, very annoying. If I play, just to show, if I play c8 equals queen, he has queen a1 check, and if I play king f2, queen e1 check will mate me. So king g2, rook e2 check. If I play king f3, queen f1 is mate. Queen f1 anyway. King h4, and then rook takes h2 is mate. So I had to be very, very careful and play the move king g2. So the idea here is that if he plays rook e2, I have a move. Well, he does play rook e2, so I'll show you in a moment. If he plays queen g2 check, b2 check, I have king h3, and there are no more checks. So if he then moves the queen to f2 or moves the rook down to e2, I can then play queen d7 check, king goes to the 8th rank, and then I promote the pawn with checkmate. So the only chance he has is rook e2, and now we'd played 36 moves each. So I wasn't going to what's called seal the move, which is when I write down the move on an piece of paper and seal it in an envelope. But from now on, he has the option to do that at any point. So I had to win instantly, and there's only one move that white can play that wins. Can you find it? I'll give you 10 seconds to think of where to put your king. Yeah, if you play king to h3, then you've lost. He plays g5, and then I cannot stop checkmate. g4 and rook h4, rook h2 checkmate are pretty much inevitable. c8 queen, g4, king h4, rook h2 mate. So that would be a very embarrassing loss, and luckily I did not play king h3. If I play king g1 or h1, he has queen a1 mate. So king f1 is an okay move, but he can then just play rook e6. And my best option is to then repeat with king g2 and rook back to e2 check. So the move that won, and the move that I played, is king f3. And here, my knight on b5 is doing an amazing job of guarding the d4 and c3 squares, so his queen can't infiltrate and play queen c3 check. Here, if his queen moves anywhere to, say, b2, I again have queen d7 check, and then c8 equals queen checkmate. And if he moves the rook somewhere, let's say rook takes h2, I can now promote to a queen. And there are no checkmating ideas. The only move that made me think for a moment was rook to b2. Which can cause me some problems, but I can promote to a queen, rook b2 check, now king g2, queen b2 check, and now I have king h3. And there are no more sensible checks for him to play. Rook takes g3, pawn takes. And unless he wants to give up the queen to stave off a mate threat, I've now just won the match. I'll play queen c8 to d7, checking him, and he'll probably have to then block with his queen, and I'll swap off. So I hope you enjoyed that game. It's not very often that you see two queens on the board, and one player 10 points down in material, but still completely winning. So yeah, that was my game yesterday, and we didn't adjourn. He resigned after king f3. So that was also very good for me. I think this might be my last game for a little while in the London League, because there's always that, well, sword of Damocles hanging over my head, which is that in the London League, players have the option of choosing the adjournment, and if one player wants an adjournment, you have to do it. You both need to agree to finish on the night through a quick play finish for that to be the time control. So I think in the last 3 or 4 matches in the London League, I've played. I think all of them have been with the time control of an adjournment, 36 moves in 90 minutes. So yeah, this might be my last game for a little while in the London League. I'll still play in other leagues because they don't have that rule. But yeah, this was very nerve-wracking, especially turning up late to the match and knowing that if I didn't finish the match, I'd have to resume play or resign or take a draw in a better position or something horrible like that. So anyway, hope you enjoyed it. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.